Professor Gavin.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the organizers, first of all, for inviting me, and then secondly to them for organizing such a wonderful and well-needed conference. I come to you really as a non-specialist. I'm not a specialist in Ottoman Sufism, and my Turkish is limited to Nasılsın. However, I am deeply interested in the concept of Sufi tafsir or tafsir bil ishara, and this is what brings my attention to Ismail Haqqi al-Bursawi. And of course, being a 10-volume work, we can't cover all of it, so I decided just to look at one particular verse and his mystical interpretation therein. What I'd like to also begin with is an idea that I've been kind of contemplating for a while, which is the idea that normally we understand revelation to be a source of transcendence. In other words, that the divine message of revelation comes from the divine realm. Ultimately, that message or revelation is revealed and is delivered to the human conduit, which in most cases, of course, is a prophet or one of the messengers of God. So we go from divine source to divine message to divinely chosen. And hence this is the descent of the transcendent message to the world that we're in. As a result, there has been much discussion regarding what that message means, which is really involved in the science of tafsir, or as Zarkashi puts it, the body of knowledge that deals with the explanation, interpretation, and commentary on the Quran, encompassing all ways of acquiring knowledge, which contributes to its proper understanding, explains its meanings, and deduces its laws and wisdoms. So in many cases, what we have is a kind of typology of exegesis that either bases itself upon what we might refer to as textual transmission or riwaya, in other words, looking at how the Quran can explain itself or be explained by hadith and so on, or one which is based on ra'i or opinion, or in other words, can be based on some kind of rational knowledges, whether that be language or law and so on. In many cases, even until modern times and recent researches, that Sufi tafsir has been subsumed under the idea of tafsir bi ra'i, because it doesn't fit necessarily very easily with the idea of riwaya. However, I'd like to challenge that notion in actual fact and say that in what we can see in actuality is that Sufi tafsir is not tafsir bi ra'i either. In fact, it dedicates itself to a unique type of epistemology which is not based on rational disciplines. When we look in history, we even find this denoted in some texts. As-Suyuti, quoting a Taftanzani, he says, they are considered heretical, Sufi tafsirs by the way, if they claim that the texts do not mean what they literally say, but rather have meanings that only the learned know, intending thereby the total negation of revealed law. In other words, he's putting out a warning first of all. But as for what certain people of realization, Ahl al-Tahqiq, have said, that the text should be taken according to their literal meaning, but that besides this, in other words, in addition, they contain subtle allusions to spiritual truths which are uncovered to people following the mystic path, and that there is a possible correspondence between the outward intended sense, then this is perfect faith and pure gnosis or ma'rifah. To quote another modern scholar, who is Dr. Abdul Halim Mahmoud, the former rector of Al-Azhar and Sufi Sheikh, he said, within any given revealed scripture-orientated religion, there will be three marked tendencies: the people of the text, or the literalists, then the rationalists, who try to understand the text with their rational faculty, al-aql, and finally the people of the spirit, who seek to understand and actualize the essential meaning of the word within their innermost beings. These are the Sufis. So with this typology in mind, we can actually suggest something else, which is, in addition to our textual transmitted orientated tafsir and our rational orientated tafsirs, we have in fact mystical tafsirs, which are completely different actually in many respects to the first two. Or from another perspective, one could even look at them in a hierarchical way, that not everyone can access this sort of information. This brings us, of course, to our author, and I'm grateful to our other speakers for really kind of saving me a lot of trouble talking about his life and works. In the meantime, though, I'd like to mention another aspect of the theory I've been talking about, which is the idea of immanence, which in actual fact Sufis are trying to return to the divine through the path to Allah, or the tariq. And in actual fact, not just in terms of receiving a transcendent text, they're trying to interpret it to bring back the immanence of the return to Allah. Our author then, Ismail Haqi Burswi, in English language at least, has not received a great deal of interest in actual fact. We find a couple of texts by his. This one is the translation and the commentary of the Fusus al-Hikam by Muhyiddin ibn Arabi, and the second one is the kernel of the kernel, again related to some passages of Ibn Arabi's Futuhat al-Makkiyah. So what we see here, that Burswi actually is being studied in English language in actual fact for his commentary on Ibn Arabi, not because of him as an original thinker and what he has to contribute, which is unfortunate in many respects. I think our first speaker will have a lot to contribute in that regard. In this sense, what I'd like to talk about is his tafsir, Ruh al-Bayan fi tafsir al-Quran, or the spiritual elucidation regarding Quranic interpretation, a 10-volume mystical tafsir or tafsir bil-ishara. And in addition, what I've decided to look at is a single verse to draw out the difference between this sort of idea and the other types of tafsirs that we have. The verse in question deals with the night journey, or the Isra wal Mi'raj, which we are familiar with in the sense that it has a single verse that relates to it in the context of the Quran, which is the verse we can see here. Glory be to him who took his servant from the sacred mosque to the furthest mosque, whose precincts we have blessed, to show him some of our signs. Indeed, he is the all-hearing and all-seeing. To provide a kind of infogram, I mean, most of us would be aware of this, is the kind of journey in the kind of lateral plane between Mecca and Jerusalem. So that's considered in many respects to be a paradigm for Sufis for the kind of purification process that leads ultimately to some kind of mystical experience. And then we see the Mi'raj aspect of it, which is the idea that the Prophet went through the 7 heavens, met various prophets, and ultimately went beyond even the Sidrat al-Muntaha, or the farthest slow tree here. Here, he begins by even just looking at the word Subhan. He says it is to express astonishment, and in actual fact, to express astonishment at an event that took place between Allah and his beloved, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He also suggests that this ayah begins with tasbih, or glorification of God, so that no one gets the idea that the event of the Isra has any anthropomorphic implications. Because the idea, of course, is that there is an ascent, and therefore this might indicate some kind of directionality, which as a kind of Ilm al-Kalam specialist he wanted to avoid. Astonishment is also to be expressed, though, with the ascent of the Prophet, as his objective was Allah rather than his descent, which returned him back to the created realm. In other words, the objective of the Prophet was to reach Allah in this sense. And the second part of the verse, الَّذِي أَسْرَى بِعَبْدِهِ, he says it means linguistically, asra means to travel by night. But he also notes that it's a form for verb, meaning it's passive. In other words, he was taken by night to perform this journey. In addition, he points out the idea that the word to refer to the Prophet is abdihi, rather than his Prophet, nabihi, or any other kind of terminology he could have used, to show that this event was not related to prophethood per se and could not be misconstrued as an indication of divinity, as Christians claimed regarding Jesus. In other words, if we say this is some kind of unique event because of the nature of the Prophet, then in that sense, this gives us the wrong implication. This is also an allusion. Immediately he enters into the realm of Ishara and says to the nobility of the station of servitude or ubudiyah, and that servitude ubudiyah is higher than the rank of messengerhood, risala, a very kind of surprising thing to say. As in ubudiyah, one's devotion to the Creator, Al-Khaliq, whereas in Risala, one's focus is the creation. In other words, you are looking at the transcendence of the divine rather than the kind of worldly realm of the created beings. Again, he carries on, and he mentions Ibn Arabi in this regard. He says that Ibn Arabi said that the Prophet experienced the Mi'raj, the ascent, 34 times. Once with his body and soul, which is the event described here, and the rest of the times with his soul only. In other words, the Mi'raj was not just one occasion, but it occurred repetitively. On this occasion, however, it was both body and soul. And what is the proof of that? He says that the Buraq, who was the creature that carried the Prophet part of the journey, carries only physical entities, Ajsam. And if the Mi'raj had been spiritual only, then the Prophet's opponent would have not rejected him so vehemently. In other words, if he had said, oh well, it's just like a dream or something like that, they wouldn't have rejected that because it's not that surprising. But that he physically went to Jerusalem and then ascended, then they consider that the reason why they had to object to it. In addition, he goes on to say, he asks lots of questions, which is interesting. It's kind of pedagogical role. He says, how was the Prophet able to make the Mi'raj actually? How was he able to travel through these incredible distances? He suggests that Gabriel or Jibreel took the Prophet's clay before he was created and washed it with water from paradise, so that he would be free of every impurity in the first instance and also of any heaviness, kathafa. Thus his body was pure and originated in the paradisical realm, and the same way that his soul originated there too. So in other words, it was easy for him to return there because that was his origin. The Prophet was also taken on the Mi'raj in a kind of cage, qafas, which was made of pearls with a floor of gold. Then he turns his attention to the word laylan. This is confirmation of the time of day that the Mi'raj took place, which is also indicated, of course, by the idea of Isra, which is to travel by night. But here he points out that it only took part of the night, not the entire night. And in fact, he mentions that a Suti said it took only a moment. It took place on Monday, the 27th of Rajab, so he gives us the date. Thus the Prophet was, he comments, thus the Prophet was born on a Monday, received the first revelation on a Monday, experienced the Isra on the eve of a Monday, left Mecca on a Monday, and entered Medina on a Monday, and passed away on a Monday. So this for Al-Bursawi says there is a mystical secret or a sir in the idea of Monday. Why is that? That it is the second day of the week and is equivalent to the second letter of the alphabet, Ba. The first day of the week is Sunday and is the equivalent of the first letter of the alphabet, Alif. Therefore, Sunday and Alif indicate the divine essence, that, and Monday and Ba indicate the divine attributes. In other words, what he's saying here is that the Prophet is a divine manifestation of his attributes in the physical context. Indeed, why did the Mi'raj take place at night? Because night is a time of relaxation and repose, and hence it is reminiscent of paradise. Whereas day is a time of work and preoccupation and is reminiscent of hellfire, as many of you might appreciate. Moreover, night is a time, and this is the key idea of course, when every beloved seeks privacy and intimacy of their beloved. So that's why the Prophet was taken at night, so that he could be intimate with Allah. Min al-Masjid al-Haram. Of course, we understand this to be Mecca, but he again goes to mystical allusion, ishara, and says the Kaaba alludes again to the divine essence, that. And the mosque, the masjid, alludes to the divine attributes, sifat. And the sacred precinct, or the haram, which surrounds both of those things, alludes to the divine actions, af'al. He goes on to comment that the black stone, al-Hajr al-Aswad, when it fell from paradise, had a light associated with it. So it was glowing and had a light that it emanated. And wherever that light reached was considered the boundaries of the sacred precincts, or the haram. So it was the Hajr al-Aswad that determined where the haram of Mecca was. Then he moves on to Masjid al-Aqsa, which of course we understand to be in Jerusalem. It refers to Jerusalem and was named thus because it was the furthest mosque from Mecca at that point. The mystic illusion, however, or the ishara, is that the sacred mosque, Masjid al-Haram, refers to the heart, al-qalb, that was prevented the polytheism and polytheists of bodily desires and its associated sinful acts from circumambulating around it, tawaf. So in other words, the heart is the equivalent of the Kaaba. And we make tawaf around the Kaaba. So here, what this heart has done, the purified heart, has stopped the bodily desires from making tawaf around it. In other words, it's free of those things. The furthest mosque, Masjid al-Aqsa, refers to the soul, ar-ruh, that is distanced from the worldly realm and is focused on witnessing the manifestations of the divine essence of that. الَّذِي بَارَكْنَا حَوْلَهُ. In a spiritual sense, due to the presence of the angels, the prophets and revelation that had occurred there. In other words, the sacred history of Jerusalem is well known to us, that prophets and revelation has been happening there for a very, very long time. And in a physical sense, he doesn't avoid that either, the natural beauty of the geographical location in terms of its mountains, its greenery, its trees and so on, fruits and so on. Here, the last part, he looks لِنُرِيَهُ مِنْ آيَاتِنَا. The entire objective, according to Bursawi, is that the Isra and Mi'raj was to show the Prophet the realities of the divine essence, that no one has seen or will see again. لَقَدْ رَأَى, and he quotes another verse of the Quran where he says, لَقَدْ رَأَى مِنْ آيَاتِ رَبِّهِ الْكُبْرَى. And indeed he saw some of the greatest signs of his Lord on that evening. And the last part of the verse, إِنَّهُ هُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ, which in normal circumstances we would understand to refer to Allah, okay, in many parts of the Quran. Here the mystical illusion, according to Bursawi, however, is it actually refers to the Prophet, as he experienced the Isra and Mi'raj to see the signs of divine manifestation, hear divine speech as part of revelation, and see the true beauty of divinity. I think from this very short selection, and I should note here that in actual fact Al-Bursawi dedicates 25 pages to one verse in his tafsir, that we can see that the mystical illusion or the aspect of the spiritual elements of the Quran that he was trying to draw out are indeed unique and deserve their own attention from an epistemological level. I think you'll be glad to know that I didn't cover all 25 pages, but just the first 6 pages of a summary that he gives at the beginning here. The rest of the tafsir goes on to the details of the 7 heavens and what he saw there and so on, the kind of typical narrative that we find regarding the Isra and Mi'raj. So here I think we can see that Ismail al-Haqi's, Bursawi's tafsir is certainly an excellent example of tafsir or illusory tafsir or mystical tafsir, tafsir bil-ishara. And in fact, it deserves its own position within the field of tafsir because of its epistemological value. Thank you very much.